Hello, good evening and welcome to the program. This is Daily Politics on Trust TV. I'm Abdullahi Ahmed. Thank you most kindly for joining us this beautiful evening. Tonight on the program, tensions have escalated after the Rivers State House of Assembly kickstarted another impeachment proceeding against Governor Siminalayi Fubara and his deputy, citing alleged constitutional violations and impeachable offences. Critics, however, in and out of Rivers State have argued for and against the position of the State Assembly, which many say is acting under the influence of the FCT Minister Nyesom Wike, who is at odds with his political successor, Governor Siminalayi Fubara, raising questions about political interference and its consequence on constitutional governance. Now, the pressing question remains, is this an APC problem or is this a legal problem that has to be dealt with in the courts of law, especially looking at the provisions of the Constitution regarding the impeachment process? How much of the politics is going to overlap into the legal and constitutional questions? We'll get all of that for a legal dimension provided by a senior advocate of Nigeria right here on the program. We'll also get to touch base with the political ramifications of what is playing out in Rivers State and how that in itself is shaping the bigger conversation about what's to come in 2027. But before we get into the meat of the conversation, let's bring you up to speed with today's political stories.
Top figures in the All Progressives Congress APC have stepped in to contend the fast-growing political crisis in Rivers State following the 7-day impeachment notice issued against Governor Siminalayi Fubara and his deputy, Professor Ngozi Odu. Party insiders say APC leaders are pushing for a political solution to avoid another round of instability in the state. Both Governor Fubara and FCT Minister Nyesom Wike are already being engaged behind the scenes. Senior government sources say the presidency has been briefed with expectations that President Bola Tinubu will intervene as key political actors work to diffuse tensions. Chairman of Dangote Industries, Aliko Dangote, has filed a formal petition with the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission (EFCC) against Farouk Ahmed, former managing director of the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority. The Dangote Group said the move followed the withdrawal of an earlier petition from the ICPC describing the switch as a strategic decision to speed up prosecution. The case centers on allegations that Ahmed spent $5 million on his children's education in Switzerland. INEC Chairman Professor Joash Amopetang has pledged that the 2027 general election will be free, fair, transparent, and driven by technology. Speaking at INEC's 2026 induction and strategy retreat in Lagos, Amopetang said the commission will tolerate no misconduct as it prepares for a fast-changing electoral space. He listed 5 non-negotiable pillars: free, fair, credible, transparent, and inclusive elections. U.S. President Donald Trump has warned of possible more military strikes in Nigeria if attacks against Christians continue. In an interview with the New York Times, Trump said Muslims are also being killed in Nigeria, but insisted Christians remain the main target. The remarks followed a U.S. airstrike on Christmas Day against Islamic State militants in northwest Nigeria, which Nigerian authorities described as a joint counter-terrorism operation, not based on religion. Trump, however, said further strikes would follow if the killings persist.
Right, those are some of the leading political stories of the day. Let's get back to our conversation of the evening, which is Rivers State still in the headlines yet again with the proceedings from Thursday this week, when the State House of Assembly for the second time in under a year initiated yet another impeachment proceeding against Governor Siminalayi Fubara and his deputy, citing a good number of issues around financial misappropriation, irregularities, and a host of other allegations that might not necessarily be unconnected with the political tension unfolding in Rivers State. Well, let's move away from the politics for a moment and talk about the constitutional provisions guiding the conversation, or that fall within the boundaries of the conversation of what is unfolding in Rivers State. We have a luminary with us this evening. Kargbo is a senior advocate of Nigeria. He's here to provide some legal context to the conversation. Happy New Year. It's good to see you. Thank you so much for stopping by this evening.
Happy New Year too, and thank you for having me.
Right. So, first things first. A lot of people think the Constitution is being weaponized yet again for political expediency. But what are your thoughts about what is playing out in Rivers? Away from the noise of politics, what do you make of it legally?
Well, you see, the Constitution is actually the regulator of all the institutions and entities it creates. The State House of Assembly, the Office of the Governor, the Judiciary are all creators of the Constitution. And to give a balance, it also regulates this institution and also provide provisions that regulate their intercourse and their, what will you call it now, oversights. You know, the state executive powers and authority are in the hands of the governor, and the legislative powers of the state, or the legislative organs of the state, is in the State House of Assembly, and the judicial powers are in the hands of the judiciary. And the people cannot recall a governor as they can recall their own House of Representatives, because in a representative government, the governor is not a representative, but rather a contractor who had promised to deliver within a tenure, and you voted him on the basis of that promise. And the moment he's voted into office, he assumes all the executive powers of the state. But where he abuses them, or he misconducts himself in a manner that meets the prescription for impeachment under Section 188, the State House of Assembly can act, but can only act if and only if he has committed what would pass for a misconduct under the Constitution. And specifically too, that process is not a political process and should not be one, and therefore political disagreement is not a misconduct, and it's not one that is contemplated within Section 188. So basically, yes, there is every reason for us to believe that it is the political fight that has now been taken, characterized as a legal fight or constitutional fight, but time would tell. But I would hope that people realize that the fight and what is happening, that the crisis, is not that of the actors, but that of Rivers State. Because as long as this crisis continues, as long as the gladiators and the actors continue to behave the way they are behaving, the Rivers State would suffer, because the resources of the state will be diverted, the energies of the state will be diverted, the government would, governance would be paused, and you could see the kind of political fury and the visit to the governor that he has had between Thursday and now. And I can tell you, I can make a guess that between Thursday and now, all he's been handling is this particular case, and all of that is at the expense of governance. Right. And for a state that is coming after a 6-month, emergency rule, I would have thought that the most I wouldn't want to use the word, logical thing to do is for them to wrap up the catching up process, because really a gap was made during that particular...
The state of emergency rule.
Yeah.
Right. And in talking about what constitutionally constitutes, say, a misconduct, a violation, you hear the argument of the River State House of Assembly as articulated by the leader of the House and then re-echoed by the Speaker of the River State House of Assembly. From your vantage point, what are the merits or demerits of the cases they're making against the governor?
You know, merit is factual based. And until those are allegations for now, as a lawyer, we do not usually give weight to allegations. It's the evidence that could give us the reason for us to make our own judgment or our own views. But let me tell you what the Constitution contemplates. It has to be a constitutional breach, obvious, clear constitutional breach. You must have breached the Constitution, although the second half of the provision says what the House considers as a misconduct. And over time, if other claims or other countries matter, what constitutes a misconduct is something that is very clear. Every public individual or everybody within that very particular environment would say, like he would say, have decision too much. You understand? Yeah. Like in the street language. It has to be a very obvious misconduct. That
it has to be black and white.
Yeah.
No doubt
definitely,
whatsoever.
Definitely. And like I said, it has nothing to do with a political disagreement. Political disagreement of whatever nature can never pass for misconduct. But if you breach the Constitution, but there is an element of it here which I would wish people consider, you know, before the emergency rule, there had been some statement as to what the government has done. But I would also want to see how the law would handle a situation where a particular set of matter had been attended to by an emergency rule, and the government had been suspended and only brought back after the lapse of the emergency suspension. So I would think that, and if you ask me for my view, whatever I think they should be dealing with is something that he has done after the suspension. Because if you want to take him back before the suspension, there is that principle against double jeopardy. Because in any case, there has already been an intervention that attended to that very particular issue and for which he was suspended. So I would think that you may not have to go back to it, but it's my thought unfinished as it is. But usually we grow in thoughts and in experience by what the courts would say.
From your understanding of the law,
yes,
the spirit and the letter of it,
yes,
is this what the framers of our Constitution envisioned in terms of using the impeachment as a tool, as a corrective or punitive tool, as a tool generally, constitutionally, to remove somebody out of power? Is this a way of applying it, you think, in the true sense of it?
Yeah, coming back to me giving answering the question on the merit of the allegations. Okay, if I answer it either way, I would have answered that. But let me tell you here my thoughts on this. Governance is a very serious thing, and the Constitution is a very serious instrument because our life depends on it, both social, personal, and economic. Depends on the provisions of the Constitution. And the framers of the Constitution usually look at, especially for issues of impeachment, extreme situations. It's not something you take very lightly. It's not all sort of infractions that are contemplated within that framework. And, usually all allegations have their own background, and that's why, the law takes into consideration the factual narrative and the background, the circumstance to what would give you, like in law, we say your course of action. But this time around, the allegations you have framed for the basis of your own allegation, there is already a background to it. And if what we are hearing from their own public discourse matters, they want something from the governor. I think they want the governor to know that they are not just legislators, but they are partners in governance, and that the governors should take them along. But even the partnership that is envisaged by the Constitution is by itself framed by the principle of separation of powers. You do your lawmaking, concentrate in your lawmaking, do your oversight, but allow the executive to govern. You cannot, on the basis of, say, we are one family, or we have agreements, or we are coming from the same source for the same purpose, we commingle or we collapse the system of governments so much so that the governor cannot take decisions without your own input or without your own authorization. And in this instance, there is even the feeling and the suspicion that the House is working for and on behalf of another personality who is at loggerhead with the governor. That by itself gives some sort of a cautionary sort of disposition to the allegation. I would think that this is not the time, and if you ask me, I don't see those allegations seeing the light of day, because there is another element of it that may be a kind of a stamper, or what I would call the wet blanket in the process. Because mind you, unlike other aspects and other powers and processes of the legislature that the courts are excluded from, this process includes what? The participation and the obvious oversight of the judiciary. So as time goes on, we would see what would happen. But if you ask me in a word, I do not see this going through.
And let's double down on the claims made or allegations made by the State House of Assembly, because it boils down to financial misappropriation, because they say they haven't seen the budget, and the governor is clearly, according to the House, operating with some sort of impunity without sending the appropriation bill, which has to be considered legally by the Rivers State House of Assembly before some sort of access by the executive to utilize public funds. But there is also what appears to be a backdoor, because Section 122 allows the governor to authorize withdrawals from the state treasury for necessary government services only if the State Assembly is yet to pass an appropriation law for the financial year. So give us an understanding of how much discretionary powers a governor has in terms of accessing finance, and what are some of the peculiar situations here. In the case of Rivers, for instance.
Yeah, finances is one of the most important aspects of state governance, and that is why the Constitution gave the State House of Assembly the authority to oversight that process. You cannot constitutionally operate in spite of them, because I think the general statement is that it is the purview of the legislator to appropriate. You do not have the power to appropriate. So you cannot expend money that has not been appropriated by the legislator. You can, by yourself, make propositions that within the coming year, this and this and this is what I want to do with this sort of money. But until you have the concrete authorization of the legislature, whatever you do thereafter is unconstitutional. And if you ask me, that could also be an imputable offense, because you cannot use state resources as your own. Nope, you cannot.
I mean,
use
even when Section 122 talks about essential...
That's a stopgap. That's a stopgap. That's not easy. Usually we cannot, what would I call it now? Use the tail to wag the dog. You understand? It should be the other way around. The primary preposition or the primary position is that your finances that you want to use for your executive functions or your executive duties must be appropriated by the legislature. And this is where the legislature is powerful. And sometimes that is the more reason why you see the executive always bending or kowtowing to the whims of the, what do you call it now, the legislature. Because if they don't appropriate, yes, they give you a leeway, but to what percentage? You cannot use that leeway, which is, like I have said, a stopgap for the whole year. You cannot. And I do not see any reason why that should be difficult for you to present a budget before the State House of Assembly. I do not see any reason for that. There is basically no reason. Whatever it is, what are you hiding? Why would you take that risk? We all know what the presidency is going through at the center. But year in, year out, they had to go to the National Assembly. And most of the time, a better part of the budget that comes out usually is a mutilation of the one proposed by the by the presidency. And the presidency most times would have no option but to surrender to it and sometimes come back to make up the gap from what they would have deleted and added their own through a supplementary budget. That's why you see them making those supplementary budget, because most of the time when they come here, the legislators will say, oh no, I have my own, what did they call them again, their own constituency projects. And most of the time they divert the budgetary provisions to those projects. And for the sake of harmonious governance, they say, okay, you have it, but I will come back later so that I will fill in the gap. So I do not see any reason why Fubara would not want to present his budget before. And I would think that part of the discussion, the back-end discussion that is going on, would be to ask him to present it. Because in any case, if they mutilate your own budget, you could always come back.
Yeah. What about the question of the State Executive Council? Because we also understand that he's working with people that have not been vetted by the State Assembly again. And I'd like to get your legal understanding of whether, I mean, clearly before the state of emergency, there was also almost the dissolution of the State Executive Council itself. A couple of people stepped out of government and some others stepped in to replace them. What do you make about those peculiarities in the conversation about whether the executive branch is being run in an unusual manner?
Well, there is also usually the need for creativity, because the Constitution gives the executive a very wide latitude to manipulate the process of the appointment of its own political aides. You know, let me give you an example. For the commissioners, you have to have the approval of the
legislature.
But for your own political aid, all you need to do is ask them for the number of political aides that you want. And nobody says you cannot just have an attorney general and all the rest being political aides that you appoint. You can do that and bypass them, assuming they want to first commissioners. Nobody says you cannot, because mind you, you are the executive. Every other person that you appoint is an appointee coming to work for and on your own behalf. So the Constitution does not in any way prescribe the number of commissioners that you should have, the position to give them. The only commissioner that the Constitution named for you and you must have is the Attorney General. So assuming you are having problem with them, I can say, okay, I have the Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice, and I have 1 or 2 commissioners or 3 commissioners. I present them before you. Fine. All the rest, I appoint political advisors, political aides, special assistants, and all the rest, and my government will be good.
Right. In the final analysis, politics has obviously been the reason for this chaos that we're seeing in Rivers State, right? You also get the sense that it's only the politics of the situation that can solve the problem, because you clearly don't see a lot of legal reasons for the chaos that we're witnessing.
Well, Rivers State has had or has a history of this chaos. I remember when I was on the editorial board of Daily Independent, I'd written so many articles about Rivers State. Then it's about issues of cults. From the days of Odili, he had his own case with this is the Kargbo, Seriki, and all of that. I think the only person who had a very smooth 8 years is Wike. I don't know how he did that. Of course, he had his problem with Ameti, but Ameti is a gentleman. He walked away and minded his business at the center, you know. And but Rivers has always been the problem child, and many of the things that we see that have now resonated across the country, they started from Rivers. Kidnapping, political killings, all of those are resident in Rivers. I say so for free. You understand? You know that. But I would have thought that a state as serious as it is, because if you are ranking states, if you take away Lagos, Kano, the next place you should be going is Rivers, because Rivers, by its own strategic position, even though it does not have as much money as Akwa Ibom, right, but it's politically more strategic and much more influential in national politics. So having it the way it is now, one would be asking the question, why would the elite, the political elite, they not take into consideration the needs of the people, the need for Rivers State to be developed in the manner that it's well deserving. You cannot be sitting on top of oil. You cannot, especially after the decision that they had with the conflict with Cross River. Thereafter, it became a very rich state. But what has been happening? Right. Much of the money they have, they filter it in political altercations, right, most unnecessarily.
And finally, as we wrap things up, take us through the step-by-step process itself of the impeachment process, from the 7-day notice, calling on the chief judge to set up the committee. What are the governor's options here? Because he clearly appoints the chief judge, so you would expect that the chief judge will be sentimental to his benefactor. But give us a snapshot of the process itself, because a lot of people think it's open and shut. Because the State Assembly initiates it, that means end of the story. Take us through the most important parts of the process.
You know, that's the most delicate process. And if you miss one aspect of it, the entire process grumbles. So, yeah, it's usually initiated by a notice given to the speaker, signed by 1/3 of the members of the State House of Assembly. That is for the state now, 1/3. And I would think that in the Rivers, I think they have 33 members, right?
And 26 of them signed.
So they've crossed that Rubicon. And thereafter, notice is given to the governor. The speaker will now give notice to the governor and notice of the impeachment allegations with all the particulars, because it has to be very clear. Whatever allegation that you have to particularize. It has to be very clear and be given to all members of the House. And thereafter, there would be a motion. They have to sit. A motion of 2/3 of the members of the House, 2/3 of 33, not 2/3 of members sitting. And there has to be 2/3 of those members. They have to agree that the allegations should be investigated. And thereafter, the Speaker will request the Chief Judge to set up an investigation panel. And the Chief Judge, if he does, would now set up an investigation panel.
And this panel is made up of people
from... Seven man, yeah. They should not be, they should be people of, what would they call it now, impeccable character, standing. They should not be public officers. They should not be political office holders. They should not be political party members. They should not be members of the State House of Assembly or the Executive. These are neutral 7-man panel. Call them wise men. They will sit. And when they sit, if they do the investigation, of course, their sitting is more or less judicial, because they're more or less hearing charges. They present the charges, and the governor would, of course, defend himself, either by himself or with his lawyers or by his lawyers. And if at the end of the day they find the allegation established, the report would go back to the House that the allegations are established. If the finding is that the allegations are not established, the process dies down there. But if the finding is that the allegations are established, the process will go back to the House, and the House would also now vote a resolution, 2/3 members to pass, and the impeachment process would end. But here is the catch too. We group, assuming we are using the word loosely here, we do not have evidence of it. You understand? The State House of Assembly would have to have the concurrence and the support of the Chief Judge, because if he drags, mind you, there are timelines. If he drags, it's going to be a problem. And if the 7-man panel is going to constitute, and not from their camp, is going to have a problem. Yeah.
Long journey ahead for the process itself.
Very much so.
Let's keep tabs on that one. We're going to have to anchor the conversation here. As always, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Sam Kargbo, thank you so much for joining the conversation. I appreciate you very much for your expertise.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
We're going to stick with Rivers. After the break, we talk about the politics of it and how APC has apparently inherited a PDP problem, one that is giving them a national headache. More on that after the break.